Even though his death is an important part of his life, Caesar's true significance lies in his uniquely capable mindset. And this was because of three factors. One, his youth and how he developed and his chaotic childhood. Secondly, his military career and how it developed and pushed him further into greatness and made him eventually into the man who he became. And lastly, his great skill in politics and how he was good at mustering up the will of the people to do what he wanted. So the first point is his childhood. Now, Caesar's childhood was not like yours or mine. It was a bit more chaotic, you could say. His father died when he was a 15-year-old boy at a very young age, and throughout his whole life, things were incredibly chaotic, even though he lived in a sort of rich aristocratic family. He was born into this family, which was called Julia, around 100 BC. And when his dad died, it left him in charge over so many responsibilities. His family wasn't just like a typical suburban family nowadays. Rather, he would have to control a large network of clients who would ask him for favors, and he would have to perform these favors for them. He had so much responsibility, and at such a young age, this really equipped him to deal with power later on. And it also helped to develop his really unique mindset of being innovative to accomplish anything he set his mind to. And even further to his cause, Caesar, after his father died, the family had lost some power, and despite their aristocratic status, and despite them being rich, they were still not super rich compared to the other rich families, if that makes sense. So they weren't in the best position, and Caesar becoming anything of remote importance or greatness seemed very unlikely. And this even got worse after his family partnered with Marius, who was a loser from the Sulla Civil War. And of course, partnering with a loser is not a good thing, especially for the public image. And this is exactly what happened. The public looked down on the Julia family. And this kind of gave Caesar a bad image from the start. So it is very clear that he didn't get his power from predestination or from his family giving it to him. He earned it through hard work. Eventually, because of his family's allegiance with Marius, Sulla's enemy arrested Sulla arrested Julius Caesar for being a sympathizer with Marius. And Caesar, with his money, bribed the guard for around $1 million worth of silver in today's currency. So he was rich, very rich, and he bribed a guard and got out of it. And he wasn't just fleeing from Rome after he bribed the guard. He was actually fleeing with a purpose, because after Sulla died, he came back and became a lawyer at Rhodes to further his political career. A really interesting story that shows his unique character is one occasion when he was captured by pirates. He was captured by pirates, and they intended to ransom him, but instead of being scared or cowering away from their moves, he insulted them. He tried to correct them with everything. He even performed poems and in front of the pirates, and he was not off-put by them at all, and he really became almost a friend, that jolly Caesar. And this was really interesting. He was fearless, completely fearless, even in the midst of great danger. And when they tried to ransom him for money, he actually asked them to raise the ransom because he thought that he was worth more. And this shows that his exuberant confidence, really paired with his innovative and fearless nature, really put together for a great military career, and later being emperor. Eventually, he gets ransomed, and he comes home, and he jokes to the pirates that one day he's going to crucify them. And they joke, and they laugh, because, it's just jolly old Caesar joking around. But then he comes back and crucifies them all. And this shows that it's really interesting, almost emotionless approach of Caesar's to this situation. And Plutarch describes the actual amount of the bribe early on when he says, Caesar bribed his captor, a centurion named Cornelius, with 2 talents of silver. My second point is that Caesar was one of the greatest military strategists because of his innovative thinking and his willingness to use Roman technology. See, Caesar was really innovative, and this really pushed his military career. He early on formed a truce, a partnership with 2 guys named Crassus and Pompey, who were both powerful military men, and it was called the First Triumvirate. And they kind of want Caesar's power because they hear of his stories of how he took over fighting Gaul, and he comes back with these amazing war stories that really make the people look up to him as an amazing hero. And it's a reciprocal cycle of him making more stories and them believing them because they're true, mostly. And he really rises to fame with this. But Crassus and Pompey, his 2 partners, they get jealous of this. Now, Pompey falls in love with one of his wives, but in a really, really strong way. And this love dominates his time and attention. And this allows Caesar, an opportunist, to move in and swoop up the playing field and take over Pompey's position, which kind of gave Caesar that push that he needed up on the power ladder. And eventually Crassus gets really jealous of this fame, so he decides that he's going to charge into a battle and come back with these war stories, and he's going to do the same thing as Caesar. But not everything works out for everybody, and he gets killed in very early stages. And then, because Crassus dies, Pompey's wife also dies, which means the friendship collapses. Lastly, the Gauls, they rise up against Rome. And it seemed like they would win, but Roman engineering proved otherwise. Now, this story proves Caesar's absolute genius on the field of battle. Now, at the Battle of Alesia, in 52 BC, Caesar put his armies into a very vulnerable position when he tried to besiege key strategic Gallic city. And initially, he surrounds it, but then he builds a wall around it, a very unorthodox tradition, taking from trees, building posts, making this crazy wall around it. And it essentially besieges the city from any supplies. And then more... I'm doing a Viva video, Mom. It'll be like a few more minutes. Can it wait? What? So, the enemies come around this one wall, and then Caesar, seemingly outnumbered, he is outnumbered, and they're coming from all sides. He builds another wall around the first wall, creating a nice little pocket of his soldiers where these 2 walls allow him to essentially fight on both sides. And this just shows that in the midst of an impossible odds, he was able to overcome and come up with these insane engineering feats. And this is really part of his genius. This is why Caesar is who he is. And he defends on all the fronts, and he wins. He wins the battle, and he beats them all. Michael Schiavone, historian, he says that the attackers from the outside world heed to pass through a field of wood blocks and iron hooks, sharpened stakes and pits, 2 trenches, and a palisade with towers. And here he's telling us that these weren't just walls, they were elaborate walls. Strong, big walls with hooks and other defensive mechanisms. And it's amazing that they could do this all in such a short period of time. My final point is his politics. Now, as with popularity always does, it led him to have enemies who really were jealous of him, and this ultimately led to his demise. Caesar's agenda was to loosen Pompey's support. In his field, remember we talked about Pompey. Caesar was trying to loosen Pompey's support so that he could fill his role and get higher up the ladder to come to greatness. And this anecdote which really shows how this happened, his amazing rallying the troops and his gusto, if you will. Now, Caesar returned from his victories at Gaul all the time with fame, a good public image. But senators were jealous of this, and they conspired to arrest him because he was powerful. Now, Caesar learned of their treachery, and he wanted to cross the Peace River, which no weapons could go across, to go threaten them. But he couldn't cross the river because it was big. So what did he do? He built a huge wall. He built a huge bridge that goes straight across because that's Caesar's way. He basically says, screw it. I'm crossing the Rubicon with my army, and I'm going to go threaten those senators for being treacherous. And he builds a bridge with amazing top-of-the-line engineering skills. And he comes across, and when he sets foot on the other bank, he says, the die is cast. And then all of his troops go down to go threaten those treacherous senators. And nothing can stop this guy. Decimus said, never mind. So, Caesar was unstoppable, or so it seemed. Pompey died eventually, and Caesar took his place, and he reformed the Roman calendar, which is an interesting thing to try to get the support of the traditional people. But an important thing to note was his death. Now, this all started when he took over. There's a plot by all the senators to overthrow him and to kill him. And he kind of knew this. He said famously something along the lines of, I don't want my life to go very long. If I'm going to die, I want it to be quick. And this is exactly what happened. The senators plotted against him, and they plotted to stab him in the Senate room. And they did. But the crazy thing was, as all of these senators swirled around him with knives, taking stabs at him, he fights back until he sees Brutus, his best friend, come in and stab him too. And that's when he knows he's been betrayed. And then he falls down and dies. And all the conspirators blame it on barbarians and assassins, and somehow through their treachery they take this devious assassination and use it to bolster themselves up the line as taking sympathy for his death, even though they were the ones who caused it. But Caesar, in his revenge, he kind of saw this coming, and he did a genius thing. He willed all of his money out to just the everyday man, and seems counterproductive, but it allowed everybody to rally behind him, even in his death, because why would they want to go against the dead image of somebody who loaned them a huge farm? If they have this nice farm, I believe it was around $13,000 they gave to everybody. You don't want to go against somebody who's that nice to you. So that was his ultimate revenge. And so, Decimus said this in the final moments of Caesar's death. He said, will someone of your stature pay attention to the dreams of a woman and the omens of a foolish man? And what he was doing here was comforting Caesar in his doubts about the assassination, knowing full well that it would actually happen. So overall, even though we often look at the crazy assassination, we should really look at the more important things in his life. The things that made him who Caesar was. which were his youth, his military career, and his career in politics.